Nhiều không? Thanks everyone who is here already. Yeah, if you got any question you'd like to post to Sam, right, you can actually start putting it inside the chat window. The chat icon is actually found at the bottom for Zoom.
Yeah, for the context, you can ask anything. So no, there's no barriers. Just that as long as it doesn't involve anything geopolitical or anything unethical.
Hmm. Sure. We have a few more minutes for the rest to join us, and then we can start.
By the way, thanks for joining, Jacqueline. Because for the context, I know her.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she's a student from my friend's friend. Very smart girl.
Oh,
Very
okay.
very smart girl. Yeah.
So currently a student.
No, okay. So basically, I'm actually volunteering with an NPO called IT Academy. So basically,
Hmm.
it's my friend Nancy, where she actually teaches she actually teaches the invention method, right? That's derived from the states.
Hmm.
So you have I'll just give you a few examples. So Jack, I keep messing Jack with another girl. So basically, right, you have kids, right, who are dealing with um trying to build motorcycle exhaust pipes with biochar. And then you have
Hmm.
another girl, I think it's Jack. So Jack is the one that's going to do the artificial photosynthesis for which is in a form of direct carbon capture. And for the
Oh,
context, she's only 16.
oh, wow. Okay.
Yes. So yeah, you have this type of folks, and then the youngest one I know, right, is a boy. I think it's 7 or 8 years old, right? He's actually
Hmm.
doing a hardware software mix where he has a RFI, he has a QR tag, right,
Hmm.
that can actually allow people to scan using an app, right, to allow because the tag is actually for dementia patients. So if there's any people, right, who can scan the QR code, right, they will
Hmm.
alert the caregivers to bring them back.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, in case they get lost.
Hmm.
Very very smart folks.
Based in Singapore?
Yeah, it's based in Singapore. They are based
Okay.
in at the uh it's not MacPherson. I keep forgetting it's the other M. Yeah, it's it's one of the old military bases where now it's repurposed. And by the way, she's being funded. One of her key from she's is an MPO by the way, and she's actually being funded by Pratt Whitney as well. Which the
Hmm.
world is small because I know my folks from Pratt Whitney.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
And all these small world lah, I guess.
yeah, the
Uh,
world is very small. I just realized it's smaller than expected. Probably because I got old.
yeah, fair enough. I don't know how to comment on that, but I'm sure our friend Pat may not even be able to comment on that also.
Well, he
Uh,
has a very wide network,
mm,
so probably is relevant to his age.
uh, his world is much smaller than us.
Yeah, definitely.
Uh,
By the way, thanks for everyone for joining as well. So I think we
mm.
will wait for a bit more before we start.
We start around 7:05 lah. Yeah.
Can. Yeah.
Mm. Okay.
So because the circle is very small, so I can open up to more of the things, No hands, but
Yeah, sounds good. By the way, this is recorded lah. So yeah, if you all want to revisit the recording, we will let you know when it's up.
yeah, yeah. Probably then Jacqueline can let her explain herself what she's doing. I
Yeah,
have to
sure.
apologize to Jacqueline also.
Sure. Okay. Hi, Paddy.
I think Paddy has been sneezing too much, so he decided to join in. Okay, sorry. My apologies.
What?
No, because I think I mistook that lady for someone else. I mistook
Mm.
Jacqueline for someone else. Because there's
Okay.
another, because we call her as Jackie as well.
Ah,
I mean, I'm mistaken really. My bad on that.
no problem.
Yeah.
All right. I think let's start. Thank you everyone for joining us on this AMA with Sam. So welcome Sam for joining us on this AMA sessions. So like always, like, let's kick things off over here. So to all of you here, I'm cool. I'll be the moderator for the whole session. So, but if you're here to see Paddy, he's unfortunately somewhere else. So he needs to be somewhere else. So I'm sending in as the moderator for today. But please don't be disappointed. I'll try my best. Okay, so anyway, welcome to the Ask Me Anything session with Sam. And maybe just to give you all a bit of a context, Sam actually has a hardware startup, and I'll actually let him introduce himself. What is the hardware startup he's working on? Because I think it's something quite interesting, especially the first time I know him, right, when I met him over Antrobos Hub group, right. I find it actually quite fascinating technology. So with that being said, right, maybe Sam, would you like to kickstart by giving us an introduction of what you're doing, uh, and so on and so forth, and maybe share with us, right, what's the vision that you have for, what's the vision and mission that you have for this startup? Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Cool. Okay, so I'll do a quick introduction. Y'all can see that I've actually got presentation there.
Mm.
So I'll do a bit of a light introduction of myself. If y'all want to hear the sob story, let me know. I can share the whole sob story, which will probably take about half an hour to the whole session. But yeah, it's really more of providing the information to share with you guys how to start a hardware startup, as well as any pain points that you guys may be facing or what you all may be having now. Okay, so on myself, I'm the founder for Unlimited Design Works. Started from 2019. I'm aircraft designer by education, and with all thanks to the environment in Singapore, I have actually managed to do quality assurance and regulations for aerospace industry by trade. So what am I doing is I am actually making first responders, or rather to be exact, to make rescues faster and cheaper with our patented flying car. Now, this flying car connotation, I have to do a declaration for that first, because everyone currently is thinking now that flying car is the passenger drones to you. So you'll be hearing like Volocopter in the Germany, or probably the pending insolvency for Lithium, or if not Archer or Joby Aviation from the States. But the one I'm building on is very much from the if the older ones will know the context of the Back to the Future 2, where they actually had a flying DeLorean. So it's literally more like a car than anything else. And the main objective is actually to allow the first responders, when it comes to natural disasters and rescues, the main problem with they have is they have a lot of obstruction and the lack of access. So I'll leave the sub story later because it is a 17-year journey. So it started way before I founded the company. It was actually it started off as the pioneer project from my polytechnic days actually. So you guys, if you all want to ask, by all means go ahead. So I'll give a quick snapshot of my experiences from actually dealing with an aerospace hardware startups, which is very much the hardest, pretty much one of the hardest hardware startups to do lah. Okay, so one thing to consider about hardware startups is that there is this few key factors that you need to consider. One thing is what we call TRL, the technology readiness level, versus the manufacturing readiness level. This is a summary that I'll share. And then the next thing is how do you want to protect your startup versus on the intellectual property. So this is also equivalent, this is so relevant to software startups as well. But however, you realize that hardware and software, right, the way that they deal is different. I'll share later. And the next one is the cost of operations that you need to consider, because it's the difference within the funding required is actually very huge. And then the enlargement of regulations and standards, because regulations and standards when it comes to hardware startups, right, it can be one of the key red tapes that you will face in the later part of development. So pardon for this large picture. So basically, I'll summarize this whole picture. So TRL is basically what you realize whether is it feasible. So it starts from level 1 to 9, where 1 to 3 is where it's at the conceptual phase. So it's more like a case that people will know that by laws of physics or by laws of science, it is possible, but no one has been doing it. Then for TRL 4 to 6, which is one of the more common ones where people have said that, oh, okay, I already have a prototype, it has shown that it has worked. And then when it comes to 7 to 9, you realize that it's already in use, it's possible, and there's actually waiting for commercialization. The reason why you can see in the TRL 9 you say it's flight proven is because this ranking system was actually done by NASA when they actually assessed for the space programs actually. So in fact, it was so good that on this assessment level that it was actually mandated across the entire hardware industry as a whole. So in fact, for major hardware startups or even investors, they will ask, what's your TRL when they want to see, because in fact, TRL may be one of the things that they may be one of the key requirements. They say that, oh, we only invest in probably TRL 7, or we can try to invest in TRL 4 if they are willing to go in early. Then you have the other side, the MRL. So MRL is the manufacturing readiness level. Now, compared to TRL, where they look at how realistic the technology is, MRL is how can you replicate it. So MRL 1 to 4 is pretty much the sort that you know the technology is there, but you need to know whether can it be replicated, can it be made to be exact. Then you have and as you go down the maturity of the MRL, you realize that, oh, it's really more, it's in the manufacturing context, is what we call a new product introduction. Whether can the process be replicated, and whether will there be a lot of quality issues or quality challenges that we will foresee in making the product itself. Let's say that, oh, there's a certain design where you need a special machine to come in, or do you need a special process to do it. This is the sort where they assess. Now, so this comes to the matrix where you realize that there's a lot of startups, even for large MNCs now, they actually look at the TRL versus the MRL to compare where how feasible is a hardware product is. So now this to make it simple for everyone to understand here, you have these four squares based on the high and low levels of MRL. So on the bottom left, you see there's a science fiction where it's a case where you have a low TRL and low MRL, which means that it's one of the early days where we can see what is on solar panel. Solar panel technology was a very early technologies in the 40s, but it was only realized much in the 80s as well. And one thing that maybe is very common now is the EVs, the electric vehicles. It was already feasible in the early 18th century, but it only got happening these few years as well. So that leads us to the next one, which is the supply chain rules. So when you have a high TRL but a low MRL, you realize that yeah, for especially for EVs, you realize that yes, it's already feasible and proven, but you realize that the supply chain issues, how to manufacture it, how to mass produce it becomes the problem, because you have to look at a lot of factors now. Your materials, your processes, your machines, and where are they located, where your materials are located. That is why Elon Musk has always said that he has several hell weeks happening when in the initial productions of the Model 3 to be exact. Then you have the other side on the opposite end where we call a low TRL but high MRL. So what this is what I deem as a buried product. A lot of people will not see this quadrant because they realize that it's either because this design or this product is a lack of demand for commercialization, or there's a industrial sanction. Why I put a apostrophe over there? Because it may be because due to several reasons, the industry or the global or the state of industry at a large, they don't want this product. So unfortunately, my product goes in that phase because it is there is a mandate where transport vehicles has to be split into the three modes of travel: air, land, and sea. So I'm one of the sort where we try to when we try to merge these few modes of travel, I realize that people are saying that, hey, you're spoiling the market. So that's one thing. And then on the final one, which is where you have a high TRL and high MRL, is where you have proven both TRL, the technology readiness, as well as the manufacturing readiness. So essentially, it's a commercial product that we see now, like let's say the laptops, the smartphones. These are readily available products. Or another one good focus is the organic LEDs that's used by the smartphones. These are also mature technologies that was only brought in the 90th centuries, the 1990s as well, and it's fully commercialized only in the later 2010s. Yeah. Then as we go on, now we go on to the next part. The key thing for hardware startups is intellectual property. Because now the challenge with hardware startups is that you're dealing with physical products, and you realize that a lot of people can replicate if they have better resources or they have more resources than you. So you have to protect yourself by having several protection methods. One of them is actually what I call intellectual property, where it's split into these four sides, and having a management assessment method, what we call intellectual asset management. So these are actually two different scopes. I'll explain to you how it works. So now, in terms of intellectual property, one key thing for hardware startup is to look at the extreme left side on patents. So yes, it's ridiculously expensive on average, about 5K USD per country. I myself, I have I do have a patent that is across the world. I've actually applied over 11 countries, and I'll just share with you all a good touch. Across these 5 years that I filed for patent, I've already paid nearly about 300,000 Singapore dollars to be exact. And but the good part is that once you have a patent, you have the hardware advantage, because if you given that you have the resources, you essentially no one can replicate where the law dictates by patents. Then you have the other side where software companies can come in as well. So trademarks, the good part about trademarks and copyrights, these two is that compared to patent where you are limited 20 to 25 years, trademarks are perpetual. So how do you use them as hardware startups? Good part about the trademarks over here is on the visual appearance. If you know that, okay, certain visual appearance on the hardware will determine its function, you can actually make it easier by filing it as a trademark than the patent itself. On the other hand, if you realize that, oh, the replication, the production process of this product itself, this hardware product is so difficult that you have one process that you can actually replicate it. You can actually choose, you can actually file either as a copyright or as a patent. But however, you have to realize that the jurisdiction for process patents and process copyrights are different. And I would say that process patents are actually stronger, but copyrights is perpetual. That's the fact. And then of course you have the other one, like what the software started saying, fake it till you make it. But I'll say for trade secrets, right, it's more like keep it, hold it on until it comes out to market. Because it's actually, the good part is that it's actually it's actually protected under Contracts Act, which is a very common legal act in the internationally. And it's really a matter of how you protect your own information. So you realize that these are the four general types of intellectual property. So intellectual asset management is how do you manage this? How do you manage this patent portfolio or this intellectual property portfolio that you have? So as I was sharing just now, so that is the key idea here is to actually manage with a lot of trade secrets if you don't have the resources. But once you have, right, you have to determine whether do you want to file for the patent. In the case for myself, because I've already been working on this for 17 years, there is a bit of a foresight to realize that, hey, this is going to happen in the next 5 or 6 years. If you know that a certain hardware is going to happen in the next 5 years, the fastest way is to file for patent. Why? Because the patent process itself will take 2 years at least. So that's a heads up for anyone who want to do intellectual property. Then as we go on now on the cost comparison now. Now this is a very stark value now you can see, and it's actually putting in Singapore dollars now, being in a Singapore environment. So you realize the comparison between hardware and software is a very big difference. Why? Because on top of building the product itself, you have to look at the supply chain. So if you don't have the machinery yourself, right, you realize that your supply chain cost, right, which is going up to the material cost, your cost of goods will be actually essentially very high. And you can see that, yeah, I've already actually put 15,000, 150,000 over there. And this is actually the annual cost for a year, because like for software startups, you have multiple iterations. Same the case for hardware startup as well. Like in my case, when I'm building a drone, right, I'm already on my third iteration, and I've already spent about 30 grand so far as a drone, which is actually not cheap for a development cost actually. So this is a context that how much funds that you need to prepare yourself on building a hardware startup. And then you'll say that, hey, there's a lot of grants that's developed by Singapore, right? So I'm giving you a masterclass on what can you apply versus what you need, because I've actually went through pretty much the entire ecosystem. So for the SG tag, which is given by Enterprise Singapore, where you can develop your proof of concept. Let's say you have a low TRR product that you want to, it's an invention that you know that you want to try. So you can go for that. But the key here that you must protect yourself with understating IP. You must say that, oh, you know that there's an intellectual property that you can commercialize. That's the key. And it is one of the hardest grants to get, because you have 3 panels to actually go through, which the second one is the one that you will realize that you have folks from A-Star, or you have folks from technical expert in the industry that the government will get to assess whether is it feasible. So you must have a very solid basing of what you need. Then you have the enterprise development grant. So this is a more general grant where it's more for new product development, where you know that, okay, regardless of the IP, you know that you want to throw money into development of this thing. So the bad part for this enterprise development grant is that it can only cover 50% of your development cost, and it's on a reimbursement basis. So the key for startups here is that prior to actually applying for this enterprise development grant, you must ensure that you have the sufficient cost to run this whole program. So essentially, if you know that, let's say your yearly expenses is like, your annual expenses is like 395k nearly, I'll put at 400k, you must ensure that you have that 400k before the government will pay you 200k by the quarter. So that's how it works. And then the other one is where you know that you have already have a good network connections, where you have venture capitalists coming in picture. Then they'll come in as a seed investment, what we call SG seed equity. So this is actually now recently it has been announced that they will merge with EDB investments to form a single equity. So that's where they do co-investment. So let's say that, okay, you got a seed investor, a seed venture capitalist that they say, okay, I'm willing to throw 4 million into this company because we trust in this technology. So what they'll do is that they actually go by a ratio to ratio basis. So basically for the first, if I remember wrongly, the first 700k, sorry, you go on by one by one. And then from the next 700 to the next 4 million. This is the old system, by the way, because now the cap has been raised to 12 million concurrently, which the ratio will change, but there is essentially 3 phases. So the first phases is where they support 70% and where the investor comes out with 30%. Second phase is where they match up 1:1 up to a cap of 4 million. But it may be raised. I don't know what is the current one. And then thereafter, from 4 million onwards, there will be a 3:7. So the investor will come out with 70%, and then Enterprise Singapore will come out with 30%. So the crucial is that you must, they as venture capitalists goes, they will be the one following. They will not lead, and they will never lead. Okay. So that's the amount, the funds that you can get. And then the last one, which I put a very big context, the regulations and standards, because they are physical components. You will have to go through a certain level of standards. Let's say even for F&B, you have to go through safety standards, whether you will get food poisoning or whatnot. Medical standards, you have FDA. And in my case, the hardest one where I have the aviation authority, which Unfortunately, for aerospace product development, it is actually pretty much plus 30% of the total project cost. So imagine that, as I was mentioning, right, you have 400K of basic annual investments for your annual burn that you have to use for a startup, right? You have to pretty much do another 120K just to do certification for aviation industry. That's how bad it is, and is the reason why it's one of the hardest startups to do. And the note is that when you want to go to different countries as well, regardless of your product, hardware startups requirements regulations will also differ by country. You realize that, oh, for food, for F&B, you realize that Japanese startups, hardware startups, the hardest because Japan and UK have the hardest food hygiene safety requirements as well. Surprisingly, Singapore is easier because we actually take reference from both of them, and we actually look at the medical technological standing, realize that, hey, this is not going to happen that soon or whatsoever. And the main reason that they are there is actually to protect the consumer and national interest, because going back to the aerospace and biotechnical industry as well, a lot of these technologies are heavily related to defense as well. So there will be cases where the country actually block you because they don't want you to come into the industry. So this comes to the last one, where you have to look at your target market for consumers, realize that you have to choose very, very wisely. So this is pretty much what I can share. So I'm actually going to open to everyone over here. If you all got any questions, feel free to ask.
Hey, thanks, Sam, for the sharing. I think it's quite a lot of information to actually digest. Uh, Even for me who maybe just want to know like how a startup actually works. Maybe um, let's start maybe from the top and say let's have a look. So we talk about regulations, we talk about standards, right? For hardware and all this, right? So maybe let's say for instance a startup founder who is keen on hardware and all this, right? Where would where can he or she find out all these regulations? Or maybe you can even share like what are the steps that you have taken, right, to start finding out about all these regulations, and how does it matter to you on where you probably will locate your startup later? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a few things. The good part is that the formal regulations, right? They're actually enacted by law. So you can actually find on the website. So let's say, okay,
Mm,
for aviation industries, right? So the US, the FAA, they actually have a whole law legislation on the requirements. And
mm,
then Singapore itself, we also have the CES, where they have the whole Aviation Act as well.
mm,
So that's the good part. But the challenge here is knowing how to work around it. So this is the difficult one, where you will need to have several I would say to a certain extent, you need to have industrial experience. So if you don't have the industrial experience, it's better for you to get an expert to come in to tell you, hey, this is what you need to do. That's the point, because especially when heavy regulated industries like aerospace and biomedical, right? They have pretty much only one or two methods that will give you the green light. When I say green light, meaning you say that it's the shortest path of approval.
mm,
So you need to have the industrial experience. So um you can, well, it depends on how much you're willing to pay now, because if you're willing to get a mature industrial expert, right, you're probably going to get you probably need to pay about probably 5 to 6K a month to
mm.
do that. But essentially, I have to say first, in terms of regulations, right, probably engaging them for about 3 to 4 months should be more than enough. If they're being nice, if they're out to read you, right, you realize
Mm.
that you're going to engage them for about at least 2 3 years, and it's going to get nowhere. So you have to be
Okay.
careful and check on the credentials of the people as well.
Mm. Okay. Can you share maybe a bit more how you select your experts then? If that's since you're on that topic. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. On the expert selection, right, you realize that you need to know which aspects of the regulations, or which aspects of I would say the startup development that you have to look in. Because
Mm,
now, particularly on regulations, right, so you will need to see if that person has credentials on, let's say, okay, they are ex-aviation regulators, like say they previously were in the industry, or they dealt with regulators before. That is one of the key parameters. And you have to understand what did they do in the part of the engagement with the regulators. So let's say for myself, okay, I have experience with dealing with the aerospace production, where we get approval to make products to build in aircraft. So that's what we call the production approval. So that is what I can do on. And as myself as an academic expertise and aircraft designer, I can deal with the design approval as well. So these are the things that you need to key look out for, that how familiar are they with the regulations versus what is actually done in the industry.
okay. is there do you have like maybe a few websites or platform in mind where people, let's say if they are looking for such people, where can they look for?
I would say that I I would say that for hardware startups, right, the is the regulations wise, as I was mentioning, right, you can look at the legal websites. So
Mm,
FDA has their own website as well. This
okay,
is actually easily searchable, and there's in fact there's a lot of startup trying to use AI to actually merge out all the regulations because it's a heapful. Just for the
okay,
context, for aerospace, right, in order to do a aircraft prototype, right, I need to have three menus of at least 3 inches thick to show what is the design of the context of the product, how
okay.
is it processed, is it made, and how is it going to be operated.
Mm,
And these are 3 separate regulations as well, which in fact is actually detailed across the websites internationally.
mm,
So that is the context that you have lah.
okay. So maybe let's switch it around a bit, right? Let's say, for instance, let's look from a government perspective, right? How can a government maybe, or what's your wish list for the government in terms of regulation so that it can actually encourage innovation in the hardware space?
Okay, one of the key things that they will have, which I have to be thankful Singapore is quite good on that,
Mm,
is
mm,
to be able to be open to look at stuff. Now you
mm,
have I'll give you all a very real context in the current aviation industry as a whole. So everyone will know about this eVTOLs industry as a whole, right?
mm,
So you realize that a lot of the regulators themselves, right, they don't know how to regulate because it
mm,
has never been done before.
mm,
So so how will they allow it is one thing. So and it's very thankful because the CAS, the Singapore regulators, they are actually very open to actually allow people to try. The
mm,
only the only caveat that you have is that you have to the expense they are there as a regulator.
mm.
So they'll only tell you, oh, this is what we'll do, this is what we'll not do. But any commercial cost, right, you have to bear it yourself.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
so if there's any wish list, right, is for them to bear any supporting cost that will come in, because you realize that it's going to be a very, if they can cover the regulation cost itself, it's actually a blessing in disguise already.
okay. Would 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 the government or regulators be able to provide you the expertise or the maybe the expert, so that would that help actually for any startups out there?
I would say yes and no, because
Mm,
now, if you're looking at the current regulator, right, they are not allowed to share with you how it's supposed to work.
mm, mm,
Yeah, so and the case here is that they are there to share with you what can be done, what cannot be done.
mm,
They cannot share with you how are you work around it.
mm,
However, ex regulators or probably the blessing that you have, right, probably can find is the ex military guy where they know how to work around this,
mm.
is where they know how to work around the regulations because they've been there.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. So they can help you with network with the expertise, right? So
correct,
that they can
correct,
actually provide you the necessary information to uh maybe not say overcome regulations, but be able to meet regulations and
correct,
standards, right? Okay.
correct.
Can maybe let's talk a bit more about manufacturing. So you were mentioning manufacturing is also part and parcel of hardware startup and all these, right? Can you maybe share with the audience over here, right? How do you actually select your manufacturing partners? Because any hardware startup, like what you mentioned just now, it's going to cost a lot of money, right? But the problem is also you cannot just because you want to save money, you also sacrifice the standards for your proof of concept at least, right? So how do you actually go about selecting the right supplier or the right manufacturer? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So in this case, right, what you need to find out is what is sufficient now, because the proof of concept itself, right, you need a certain build or rather certain quality, right, to actually ensure that you can actually function on its own. So first thing first, you have to go back your design. So if you don't have design experts, right, that will be the first thing that you need to find. Then
Okay.
second thing, the second one you need to do is now once you know that you have a very solid design, then it comes to who can like going back to mRNA, who can replicate, who can actually manufacture it. So in the current industry now, there's a lot of ways that you can build it out. So if let's say that okay, if it's a scale small enough to be of a test of, let's say it's a 30 by 30 cm, it may be easier that you can 3D print itself because 3D printers are fairly cheap now at the moment. And it's actually one of the cheapest way to go around it. Unless you're looking at specialties materials, like let's say for drones, you need carbon fiber. And for carbon fiber itself, you need specialized equipment to cut as well because they have certain there's certain requirements to actually cut carbon fiber. For the context, if everyone knows, that you need a very high speed, high revolution rate to actually effectively cut carbon fiber. Else not, the structural integrity will be compromised. So now, then you have to look at who are we being able to look at. So I would say that for manufacturing itself, right, if it's for car, I'll give a general industry standards. So basically, if you're looking at plastic products, it's easier for you to do 3D printing yourself. That's the cheapest way, or find someone who has a 3D printer. The lucky part Singapore has is that if you are one of the alumni of the schools, most of the schools, they do actually have a 3D printer already, and it's just a matter of how much are you going to pay to get them. Okay. Now, when it comes to metals, metals wise, that's where the cost will come in. So you will have to look at what we call CNC companies, precision manufacturing companies, whether are they capable to build that, and whether is it specialist metal is another question. So the cheapest way to work around most of the time, I would say that look at the SMEs in Singapore. They are likely going to be the cheapest that you can get in the region, unless you can get access to precision companies in Malaysia. Then but the problem here is you will have to look at how you are going to get through the customs, which means that you may have a pending duty tax as well. Okay. Then of course, then there's the longer shot. We have Taobao over there, the biggest Taobao, where we can actually get the Chinese manufacturers to come in. But the context here is that you will need to decide whether it will affect your startup's impact, because once you allow the people from overseas to manufacture, this includes for going to Malaysia as well, you are risking giving your core technology to them. So you will have to ensure that whatever they are doing is not affecting whatever you are doing. So you really have to choose your demons correctly, and how much are you going to pay to protect your own technology.
Okay. So actually, the next question I'm going to ask is how do you protect your idea then? Definitely, since you definitely have to sort of share the design with the manufacturer in order to do the proof of concept at least. Do you have maybe certain guidelines that you work with, right, to ensure that at least the idea doesn't get stolen by the manufacturers or not?
Yep, definitely. That is actually a way to work around. So
Mm.
one key here is where IAM comes in, intellectual asset, is that you have to know where is your core product, where is your core function that makes this vehicle work, or rather that makes the product work. That is the one that at all costs pay whatever it is. If there's a need to pay for to do it in Singapore, you will have to do it. Alternatively, or if you know that the certain core product can be done as a function of multiple products. So like in my case, because my vehicle can drive and fly at the same time, my drone itself, right? How I'm working around is that I'm actually combining a drone which doesn't have the technology itself and another RC car as well. So in this matter, yes, it makes it more difficult to prove as a proof of concept, but the safe part that you have is that it doesn't expose your core product, which is that's the way to work around. So you need to know what is your core product, how you're going to work around it, and in this manner, once you know how to work around it, you realize that that is actually your backup plans. If you cannot do it as a core product and where you cannot patent it or whatsoever, what's your way to work around on this core technology or this core process that you need to protect?
Okay. So that's quite a sort of fair bit of even planning first, right, before you maybe get a manufacturer to manufacture your part or your proof of concept altogether.
Correct.
Okay. Um, so let's talk a bit more about maybe so you just now you mentioned about this TRL and MRL, right? So technology readiness and manufacturing readiness, if I remember correctly.
That's correct.
So is this TRL and MRL sort of international standard, and if it is, like, it came from where? Can you maybe share a bit of a history of it if you know whatever you know lah.
Yeah, okay. So TRL, as I was mentioning, right, it's actually it's industrially known. It's an industrial standard when it comes to R&D. In fact, it's one of the key KPIs for universities as well. So
Okay.
because that was actually this TRL assessment levels, right, was actually done in the 60s by NASA itself when they actually started the Apollo missions as well. So that was the Apollo mission was actually the key starter to TRL assessment.
Okay.
So that's why it started.
Mm.
And It's really the benchmark where, in fact, for even for deep tech investors as well, they'll ask what's your TRL. So you will have to, and the thing is, the definition of TRL will differ per country as well, because it depends on how they assess what is the TRL levels in the country as well. Now, on the other side, MRL is one of the ones where we will say that a person who knows their stuff will know what is MRL because
Okay.
yeah, because MRL is one of the it's not an industrial norm, it's not industrial standard, but it's actually used within the more physical intensive industry. Let's say, oh, when you know that your product costs in the millions, then they'll look at, hey, how much are you going to throw in developing the MRL? Yeah. On the other hand, if your product is in the case where it's a sub thousands one, right? They pretty much won't really care because they realize that the amount of cost that you're going to throw into the MRL development is not going to be much. So it really differs per industry. Aerospace is very heavily used, biomedical as well. But then on the consumer products, not that much, and as well as the software wise, right? No one cares about MRL because it's literally made by manpower, so
Okay.
yeah, that's pretty much how it's being compared.
Okay. So how does this CLL and MRL work? I mean, okay, I saw it's like from 1 to 9 for both of them, right? But
Right.
I don't think it's something where you call it 7 means it's 7, right? So is there maybe some guidelines or measurements, or actually you have to maybe get auditors to come and have a look and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Okay. So this is actually where this is where the key details comes in. This is where the what I call the difference between theoretical science and applied science.
Okay,
So
good.
okay. So on the applied side, how TRL and MRL is applied? They are, rather than looking at assessing 1 to 9 entirely, right? They're actually split into 3 segments. So for TRL side, it's actually 1 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 9. So 1 to 3 is that okay, you know that it's a science law, and you know that people has been trying. So that's the initial part. So from TRL 4 to 6 is where what we call okay, you already have a physical prototype, and you know that yes, it's really is operable in a lab environment. Okay, and then from 7 to 9 is where okay, is you have brought that prototype out of the lab environment and you actually work on initial pilot trials. Let's say okay, for my case, when I say I'm on the 7 to 9, is that people have already seen it in public, right, driving on the roads as a prototype, the single one-off unit. That's how it goes. Okay, so that's how TRL goes in. For MRL now, first TRL, MRL 1 to 4 to be exact. Because MRL actually has 10 levels compared to TRL where there's 9. So for MRL, it's 1 to 4 on the early stage. 1 to 4 is where they know that you already have you have to develop the machines to make the processes. So let's say one good example is 3D printers. So the now with the plastic 3D printers, right, is already available, but you realize that as a MR for metal 3D printers, right, the MR is actually considerably lower in the industry now because you have different metals that you have to come in. So that's how you need to assess that. Okay, how are we going to develop from the plastic 3D printing to the metal 3D printing? That's on the TRL 1 to 4 side. Then you have 5 to 7, where you say that, okay, you have the processes, you got the machines, and you're trying to do a new product development for this product itself. That means your 5 to 7 is that you have a new machine that you want to do the initial manufacturing trials. So in the technical context, it's what we call NPI, the new product introduction. And then from 8 to 10 now is where they already verify, and is where the processes is where they are already looking at, okay, you got the machine, you got the processes, what is the error rate?
Okay.
Correct. So when you can finally achieve when you can achieve minimal errors, right, that where it doesn't affect the product function itself, then what is effectively what they call level 10 really. So basically you can have quality issues. That means you have defects in the system, but it doesn't affect the product itself. But as long as it can be produced, it's considered MRL 10.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So let's look at okay, so let's go back to MRL again. So the manufacturing MRL and all these, right? Uh, does all these sort of apply to manufacturers? So what I mean by that would be like, for instance, or maybe this particular manufacturer can only do MRL maybe 4 to 5 kind of stuff, and that manufacturer can only do maybe from 7 onwards and so on and so forth. And how will you be able to know which manufacturer can do what? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So this is actually a very good point that you have raised out actually, because
Mm,
this is where in fact industry as a whole, this is actually you realize that people who can do TRL 1 to 4 is very rare.
mm,
And most of the time it's actually the government, because like as an example example in Singapore, right? If you
uh,
know NAMIC as well as the ARTC,
mm,
the ARTC part of the A-Star team, right? They are the ones where they have all the fanciful machines.
mm,
So when I say fanciful machines, like they have the industrial gold bar. These are the machines you need, right? When you need to develop new processes. Then
mm,
as you go on, as you go down the manufacturing readiness route, right, you realize that hey, a lot of this, right, when you have the expensive machines, I realize how are you going to translate to cheaper machines? That's how they
mm,
actually go down, because you need the expensive machines to realize what is new. Then you will have the process, right, to make it. How are you going to make it to the cheaper machines where you know that the functions are limited? And then the other one is, given now you have a fixed process from the cheaper machines, how are you going to control to make sure that it can be replicated constantly?
mm.
Yeah,
Okay. So okay, let's continue on the manufacturing side of things. So I remember in your diagram, right? I think it's high TRL and low MRL, right? You actually have this thing called supply chain
correct.
woes, right? And then I think you're referring it to what happened to Tesla T, which maybe can you share with the rest of the audience, right? Uh, what is this supply chain woes, and did you actually come across something similar, and how do you overcome them? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, in this case, right, I'll use the whole good example of this whole EV industry as a whole, and
Sure.
also to put in a more difficult context on the EVTOLs on the aviation side.
Mm,
Okay. Now, the key supply chain issues right now, when you look at high TRL, low MRL, is that your technology is mature, but the thing is the industry is not ready because of several factors. First thing first, they don't have access to the materials required to build that technology. First one.
mm,
Second is they don't have the machines to process the materials.
okay.
So now
Sure.
in the whole electric vehicle industry as a whole, as everyone say, right, Chinese has already embargoed the entire, or rather they have already hoarded the entire lithium industry.
Mm,
In fact, it has been so bad that they are actually manufacturing at least 60% of all batteries internationally. And in fact, up to a certain extent, if you look at secondary products, right, they are covering at least 90% of the whole battery industry as a whole. So that's
okay.
how bad it is. And then the second part is that, okay, now when you look at special batteries now, let's say solid state batteries, you realize that, oh, you the technology is there, but no one has made the battery no one has actually manufactured solid state batteries at an industrial level. All these are actually made by specialist machines that are used by universities, where it's actually literally custom machines. They are one-off experiments. They are not meant to be replicated. They are not machines that can replicate as well.
Mm,
That's the function. So this whole material versus machines is the whole issue that the whole electric industry has a whole. And then you add a double whammy on the aerospace industry. You realize that the batteries for the EVs, right, cannot be the same batteries that is used for eVTOLs, because the regulation requirements is different. The materials itself required is different. So you realize that whatever you want to do for the normal EV cars can't be replicated for the eVTOLs, because the cost is entirely different. So this is the exact supply chain woes that EVs industry has as a whole, because you realize that for different battery products, you have different processes. And for even for making the battery processes themselves, you will have to find the correct people and the correct money who have the, or rather the people who have the funding to finance the entire process, which a lot of it in the whole MRL raising issues, right? Almost 70 to 80% are supply chain issues, because let's say that you have to the machine itself, for example, a battery building machine itself, basically what I would say is the lithium polymer battery itself, the manufacturing device, a cheap one would be pretty much in a matter of 500 to 700k Singapore dollars. The mass producers one that probably Samsung or probably Kettle is using moment, you're looking at 2 to 3 million US dollars per machine. And that is just the production cost of building that machine. You're not including the cost of shipping it over. Let's say that assume that you can get it from China. So you to ship it to Singapore itself, because the machine itself, right, is about good 3 to 4 tons. You're looking at a case where you need a whole ship, right, to ship that whole ship over. So the ship the whole machine over. So you have to, so in this case, your transport costs, you have to hire a ship. You need to hire a whole container ship. You have to split it over 3 to 4 containers. And then you have to go through the stamp duty standards going to do importing in Singapore. That itself, right, is pretty much a good 20% of the overall manufacturing cost. So even for, so going back to the same process, the manufacturing cost for that battery for mass production, right, is about 2 to 3 million US dollars. Then to ship it in Singapore, you spend another probably a good 40 to or a good 400, 500,000 just to put it in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then we are not forgetting about the operating costs now because they require electricity to work. And for the context, these machines, right, they are drawing at least about a good 500 to 600 kilowatts per hour. So
Okay.
in this context now, right, if you are assuming that the machine operates 24 hours, right? So you are looking at times 24 hours is easily about 1 million, one gigawatt. And that relates to your electricity cost. And Singapore is known to be the more expensive electric cost in the world. So you're looking at pretty much another $500 Sing per month on operation of that one machine itself.
Okay.
So these are the few that is why Tesla has all these issues because they are based in US, but all the machines come from China, so they have to ship all the machines over to US, which in Texas, and that's a lot of import costs, which is why Elon actually decided to build a gigafactory in China because it makes more sense for them.
Okay. Manufacturing. Okay, so I think this is an interesting inflection point where we can probably move on to talk a bit more about raising funds and everything else. So how would you propose a hardware startup founder raise funds? Because from what I'm hearing from you, right, there's actually a lot of parameters at play. Like for instance, maybe let's say for instance you manufacture a certain part, but you have to maybe get it air flown, or just now the example you were saying, you actually have to ship it over and it occupies a large volume inside the ship and all these. Like, so how do you estimate all these costs, and then how do you raise funds to cover these costs? Can you share with the audience on that? Yeah.
Right. Okay. So here's where the fun part where it comes together, how you compare on fundraising or software startups now. So for hardware startups, right, because that is the reason why they're called deep tech startups. Essentially, all hardware startups are considered deep tech currently. I don't know why, but it's really because of the amount of funding versus the gestation that require. So typical turnaround for software startups, you're looking at 2 to 3 years for TRLs. Basically, you are looking at from product development to a commercial product, right? You really need about just 2 to 3 years. But compared to hardware products, right, you probably, for a zero from scratch, let's say you have a low MRL, low TRL product, right, you will need at least 20 years. So how you are going to work around is that you will need to segment your phase of development, like I was mentioning. So let's say now that you have you are at a low TRL phase, what are the funds you can get? And then as you raise up, you realize that the people who own the funds, right, they'll look at different phases. So a good start, right, is that let's say you have a very low TRL, low MR product. It's a new product, new technology. Your first phase is your best bet is to get to the schools or the government. Collaborate with them, let them work out the technologies because they are the ones that have the finance. They have the ones that have the financial power, right, to fund early technologies. In fact, that is actually a mandate by the schools. Now, yeah, correct. So now, as you go to 4 to 6, then that's where all the public investors comes in, and that's where your challenge comes in because you have already verified the technologies, and you yourself at the end of the day, right, for the initial investments on the tech level for 1 to 3, right, is to develop a lab prototype. Okay, so once you have the lab prototype, then is where you have hardware, you have a physical product, right? That will make it easier for you to look at commercial investors. They will look at it or say, hey, this is very interesting for them. They want to invest, or they see that, hey, they'll say that yes, you have the product, or they'll look at the MRL next, then say that how mature is technologies to develop this product itself. That's where commercial investors comes in. So when you have the key to look at external investors now, we're looking at public investors, right, is where you have at least a TRL 4 as well as an MRL 4 to 5. In the case where you have a TRL 4, but you have an MRL 1 to 3, right, your best bet is to look at funds from manufacturers because they are the ones that they know the manufacturing technology well, and they're willing to invest in you because they want to develop this technology. Yeah. So public investors will come in when you have a TRL4 and MRL4. They know that, okay, you have the machines, you have the technology. It's meant to push up. This is where you know the big brothers, the venture capitalists, Temasek, folks like Temasek, GIC, or even the PIF, which is the public investment, the sovereign wealth fund from Abu Dhabi, in fact, they are the ones that they look at this stage where you know that you need, because in this stage, right, most of the time you need at least 200 to 300 million to actually develop it. It's that sort of numbers. So you have to look at this sort of people, how they sum up this money across the stages. In fact, at the second phase, where it's the mid MRL phase, right, you may need to split it at least across 4 to 5 stages. Because it may be impossible to raise 300 million all at once in my case, because in my case where I'm building the aircraft on its own, right, by the time I reach at the second phase, I'll need to raise about 200 million. So in my case, I will have to split over 4 to 5 sections of 50 to 60 million, which is more digestible for venture capitalists, because 50 million is quite reasonable for them at that stage. And then you go to the next stage where the high TRL, high MRL. So that's where you know that, okay, by the time you come in, right, you realize that you already got customers. So
Okay.
yeah, so that's where revenue will start coming in. So by the time, most of the time, right, when you hit a TRL 7 or you are reaching 8, right, and you already have a machine of processors, you start to have new customers. They'll say that, hey, we want to buy your product. We want to be the first mover. We want to be the first adopter. That's where you can do the revenue comes in, especially when it comes to large hardware products, right? The best way is to have a book, what we call a order book, to let people to buy the product on a pre-order basis. Or the other way around, for smaller products, right? The best way is actually to do crowdfunding. When say crowdfunding, let's say that you can actually look at this crowdfunding basis, right, where you can get your first products, your first customers in to say that, hey, they want to buy the product. I think one of the good ones is our friend here, Patty, right, he was actually a first buyer for one of those rings, right, where you can actually use it to actually detect your heart rate and everything. Yeah, this is one of the few points where you can. So if, let's say, in the summary for the NTRL, right, look for your customers. So that's where your revenue will comes in, and thereafter it's really a matter of managing your cash flow versus your product demand.
So it seems quite interesting, like, because like, so I imagine there's a journey here, like, as you progress up TRL and as you progress up MRL, right, you actually will now have to approach different types of investors. Am I correct to say that?
Correct.
Okay. So in that case itself, right, how would you, okay, so let's say if I'm looking from a founder's perspective, which means I'm going to have many rounds of raising funds as we go along. So how should I balance this out while I'm doing my R&D on my hardware, my hardware and all this, right? And I still have to constantly, I won't say struggle, but constantly have to reach out to investors. Uh, and that could be a chance. I'm not saying no, like there could be a realistic probability that your funding round may pause, may totally stop because you can't find the right investor, or you may have to hold your project until you find the right investor. So can you maybe share with your audience, how would you manage such a risk? Yeah.
Well, yeah, probably this one I can share in my personal experience.
Sure, by
Okay.
all means, yes.
So you see, so in my case, right, as I was mentioning, because this is a 17-year journey, so how have I actually funded this project all along, right? It actually all started with my own. I have been bootstrapping for the longest time I know.
Okay.
So basically, right, I was actually I've actually been pushed. The best way I would say, regardless hardware or software, is if you know that you have the financial capability to finance for it, try to finance it yourself. Because the challenge for hardware startup itself, right, is that being a hardware, right, you need to show people the product itself, which is hardware, and seeing is believing. That's essentially across, regardless hardware or software. So you need to develop that product itself. So you may in across in the process, in my case, I was very lucky to have an angel investor coming in 2019, where that's why I could actually protect all my modes where I actually filed for my patent. So you will have processes where you realize that investors will come in at a stage where in uncalled timing or
Okay.
rather uncalled timing, or they it's the sort where they call angel investors, where regardless VCs or angel investors, where they come to say that, hey, they are the ones that they have faith in you and they want to join your cult, essentially. That's
Mm.
how Elon Musk comes in as well.
Mm.
So you will have to structure this type of financing investments. How they do come in? How are you going to let them exit? Because as I was mentioning, because hardware, you realize that hardware startups, right, they have a very long gestation moment.
Yep.
So there will be times where these several hardware startups that come in early stage, they say that, hey, we want out at this phase now because it's really too long for us to wait. There's too much for
Mm.
us to bear.
Mm.
So you will have to prepare exit strategies such that they will benefit them regardless at any stage where they come in.
Okay.
And then in the case where you realize that, oh, there's a gap that you have to stop. Let's say that I'll give myself in the unfortunate case where I've already got a prototype out and I cannot get any initial founders for mass production, right?
Mm.
Then you realize that the best thing you have is that because you have a hardware, the best thing you can do is to go around the market. Because the good part about hardware startup is that when you have a product, or even for software at the stage, right, is to really go around and look for the prospective customers. Because the the good part about hardware startup is that most of the time, right, the hardware startups have a good, I would say, a strategic advantage, because you will, in order to build the hardware, you will have to secure the resources.
Mm.
So you will know that you have a perspective when they have seen your product, and the investors will know the resources that they need. So I'll say that I can't give a good. I will say that realistically, right, if you realize that there's a gap in your financing, right, I factually speaking, I'm saying sorry, because akin to software startup, right, it is on your own. But
Mm.
the next thing is, what can you do with your hardware?
Yeah. Okay. Oh, well, okay. That's actually quite a fair bit to digest. And I think we covered a bit more on the patent side as well. I think you also cover a bit on the patent side in your presentation altogether. So now you're saying that actually you probably need to patent in different countries. Okay.
Correct.
So the question here is this. I mean, given the limited funds that you have, right? And then just now you already mentioned that it's very challenging to raise funds for, especially for uh hardware startup because of the gestation period and all this, right? I think we probably need to be a bit more prudent on where we want to file the patents and everything else, right? So
Oh,
how would you, or maybe can you share with the audience, right? How do you actually select which country to file the patent with and
okay.
why? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm.
Okay, this following information for the next 10 minutes, right, is
Uh,
going to is what you are going to be paying at least probably $400 to $500 an hour by a patent lawyer. So this
okay.
is actually very valuable,
Sure.
valuable
Sure.
information.
Yeah.
Okay, so when it comes to applying for about filing for IPs, right, the case here is that you need to look at where the resources are, where the regulators are. So
Mm.
in my case, I can share with you, I've actually applied over 11 countries for my patent. One of
Mm.
the key countries: America, Japan,
Mm.
Korea, China,
Okay.
Singapore, which is the base of the IP itself,
Mm.
Australia, and then I've also filed for the European patent, where I filed in the UK, France, Germany, and Ireland. So you realize, if you look at all these countries that I filed as a whole, right, why did I choose them? One, they have one common entity. All of these countries, right, where the key regulators, right, are the one that cause the shock in the aviation industry as a whole.
Mm. Okay.
So because when it comes to developing a new aircraft or developing a new hardware product, right, you need to look at the country, which are the countries that are the ones that host the regulations.
Mm. Okay. Okay.
So like in the case, so I'll give you a good example. So let's say that because I have a patent in America, right, and the funny part about filing in America is that there's a lot of other countries that actually follow American standards.
Mm.
So in one of a good example is Indonesia. Like in the case for this disaster response, right? In fact, Indonesia is one of the key economies or the key countries that I want to really go into. And
Mm.
you realize that for the aviation industry in Indonesia, they actually look at America.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, so they literally they copy and pasted the entire FAA regulations, which means if you have your patent strategy solidified in America, you're blocking at least half the world, because pretty much half the world are actually following America on their standards.
Mm. Mm. Okay.
Yeah, so this is the way to look around on regulation and patent filing as well, because you need to know where your resources are. So let's say that, okay, why did I file for a patent in China? It's because, right, it is mainly because a lot of manufacturing capabilities and resources are in China as well.
Mm.
So you need to know where it's a very long play. I think I myself I spent about 2 3 years looking at the technological advancements of manufacturing technologies as well. Realize that yeah, you have to file for the places where the machines, the technology, the key blockers are at.
Okay.
They are your best friends and your best enemies. So make sure you block at those countries.
Okay. 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 Uh, let's talk a bit more about filing patents and everything else. So, um, which country is the one that actually takes the longest to file? And what specifically was the challenge for that long period of time? Yeah.
I would say, unfortunately, right? I would say the longest one would be Europe. Why? Because Europe now, right, compared, because I've went through the longest route because I went for the hardest patent, what we call a PCT patent.
Okay.
So for the context, a normal patent happens in the case where you file individually per country, where the date of filing will differ. However, on the other side, where you file for a PCT patent, because they go through the Paris Convention, you realize that once you file for a PC patent, the date of filing will be the same across the country. So, long thing short, what will happen is that I won't have legal lawsuits like whatever happened to Apple versus Samsung. They have constantly issues, or the IP issues that Creative has with Apple as well. The reason why they have all these legal lawsuits is because they filed for the patents separately per country. So they have different dates. And with different dates, you realize that for intellectual property, especially patents itself, the date of filing, the earlier you file, the longer protection that you have.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where you say that, hey, I'm the older one, so you are the one copying me, literally.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. So actually, we have one more question from the audience. KK. So KK is saying that, hey, if you only found in these countries, right, won't others be able to copy your tech, then maybe sell it to somewhere else that is not sort of adopting the same standards?
Okay, so yeah, that is a caveat which I would say I'm honest. I'll be honest and say yes, that can be possible. But the next question is how acceptable it is. Now, so
Mm.
okay, now going back to my example now, why didn't I found in Malaysia? Because Malaysia they also follow FAA as well, by the way. They follow the
Okay.
American standard. So yes, you can develop technology and you can get the Malaysian authorities to work with you. But the next thing is, if you do these products and when it gets accepted by the Malaysian regulations, what will be your global penetration rate?
Mm.
Yeah, because if I'll be honest with you, so if you have any Malaysian products, right, semiconductor, I'll give a very good example. Semiconductor technologies. Malaysia is one of those countries where you have very mature semiconductor technologies because of the help of Microsoft and Intel in the early phase as well. But the thing is, you realize that Intel is actually banking on the US technology as well. There is no hardware, there's no semiconductors technology, or rather semiconductor manufacturers that is supported by the Malaysian government that is being sold overseas. One good example, right, in Malaysia, right, is Proton.
Okay.
Yeah, so Proton realized that it is a pet project by the Malaysian government, and you
Yep.
realize that Proton is widely sold in Malaysia. But if you look at overseas, right, because they don't follow industrial standard overseas, they are not being sold overseas as well. So yes, you Protons is very so well in Malaysia. And the challenge here is you will actually limit your technology feasibility, or rather your global penetration overseas. So this is a good part. This is actually a good part of regulation as well, because if you know the regulations well enough, you realize how far are you going to penetrate in the market, which will determine your ultimate market share.
So you can actually know your market share while filing the patent, and that's what you're trying to say.
Yes,
And
correct,
maybe even see whether there's a market potential in the first place, right? Before you can even talk about market penetration. Okay, actually that's an interesting point, which also gives you some ROI lah
yeah,
for
you can
spending the
actually
money.
assess the ROI. Yeah, exactly. So now that you know given that you know your patent strategy, right, then you
Mm,
realize that you know what's your global penetration rate. First point. Second point, you realize that
mm,
how much are you going to earn versus how much are you going to pay for it. Then you will make the financial sense to say, if you are going to pay like, let's say, 4 to 5 million, right, for industry with a total addressable market of probably 500 million, yeah,
okay.
that's possible. That's reasonable. But if let's say you're going to pay 400 million, 4 million, right, for industry that's over 50 million, right, I'll probably not recommend you to do it because your market is very small and 50 million would mean that it's just a 10-year run.
Okay.
Unless the only unless is the unless is that it's a sunrise industry where you know that, oh, like let's say for the aviation industry, there's it's not good, the amount of flight passengers is not going to drop, it's going to raise only. That's where you know that you will know the investment impact within Malaysia as a whole. Going back to the same example, how much are you going to pay for it to actually look at the whole local industry as a whole?
Okay. So, want to talk a bit more about the parts about filing patents and all this. I think actually have discussion before on this. So does it mean that every time you have something of a new design, you should be filing a patent, or maybe you should be filing something else because maybe it can still offer you the same protection, or maybe like just now what you mentioned, right? It can actually protect you a longer protection. So does it mean anytime you have a design breakthrough, you definitely should file for patent rather than filing something else?
Yeah. Okay, so in this context, right, I was mentioning on IAM now, intellectual asset management. Yes,
Mm,
that is the thing that you have to determine as a hardware founder itself, whether
mm,
do you need to file the patent essentially. So in my case, right, I filed for the PCT patent because I know that the architecture that I filed is going to be the only one that will work.
okay.
Yeah, so that's the one that I know that I have to protect at all costs. But
Mm,
on the other hand, if you know that there's certain technology that like I give an example, like, okay, I know the architecture, but there's a secondary product, there's a second core product that I need for this vehicle for it to work, right? Then you realize that, hey, that's something that probably you want to consider to file for a second patent. But on the other hand, if you realize that the now, because the thing is, patent filing is a very heavy cost, you're looking at probably about 200 to 300K per year per patent portfolio to be exact.
wow, okay.
Okay? So the key determination, is it worth the effort for you to do it? Because you can actually let people have the patent, that's for sure. But if they're willing
Mm,
to work with you in the long run, why not? Because
mm,
if the case is, if you know that your ROI is too big for, I would say we have to be realistic for a bit. Like, if you know the amount of money that you earn, right, is more than enough for you to share, why not share it?
okay. Okay.
Because in this manner you can actually let them bear the manufacturing cost as well, and you can say that it's not your fault.
Mm, okay. Sounds
Yeah.
interesting. Uh, Maybe okay. I think we're almost towards the end. Actually, I still have a few more questions to cover, lah. But I think what we can as the next question, right? Can you maybe share with the audience how you go about selecting your IP lawyers and what are the things that you look out for? I mean, given the fact that it's such a high expenses, right, to go and file patents and everything else, I think it's good to be able to find the good ones. So how do you actually go about finding it? Yeah.
Okay, so for lawyers right now, for hardware startups, right, you have to know that we have to hire two types of lawyers. One is the
Mm,
corporate lawyers, right, dealing with all the contracts and whatnot. Then you have
mm,
the IP lawyers. So now, when it comes to IP lawyers, right, I prefer to go for the drop and forget method because
mm,
now there are in terms of IP lawyer, intellectual property lawyer ranking, right? There is actually a ranking, and
mm,
it's an international one. So you can have a look at them, but note that the higher the ranking is, the more expensive it is. So in my
mm,
context, right, my patent lawyers are actually with VJP. They are actually a patent lawyer company that's found in Munich for the last 100 years. So it's
mm.
literally an old school. But
Okay.
the good part is they are industrially known to be the people, right, that once you file for patent, it will go through for sure.
Okay.
So yeah, and the thing is, yes, you can get a cheap lawyer, but you have to know that every time you file for patent, you have to pay for the application cost. And
Mm,
if it gets rejected, you will have to pay again.
okay. Okay.
So it is a matter of how much are you willing to pay and how much worry, or it's a matter of insurance. How much are you willing to pay in order to forget about this?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it goes back to hiring any like professional service. Like, at the end of the day, what you want is I pay the money already. I don't have to focus too much on it, or maybe very minimal effort on it lah. That's what you're trying to say over here, right?
Correct.
Okay. Uh, yeah, I think we are towards the end of the AMA already. I just wondering anyone here would like to ask a question to Sam.
Yeah. Any final questions?
Yeah, any final questions? Because I think I've been dominating the conversation altogether. It's
I'm quite
just
sure
another.
everyone will be is learning a lot because I have to be honest, you have been touching pretty much everything on the aspects of the hardware startups, which is actually quite rare for someone to know everything.
Oh yeah, thanks. So
Yeah.
because actually, like I said, if I look at it right, I probably only have been touching what I'll call the external circumstances around the hardware startup. I haven't even talked about the internal one. I probably would like to leave the internal discussion, so internal of a startup discussion maybe for another round of AMA. We would love to have you back well for another round talking about that as well. Okay, so we talk about raising funds. We talk about patents. We also talk about like TRL and MRL. We talk about regulations. We talk about manufacturing, selecting manufacturers, and stuff like that. Where actually it's quite interesting. That we can actually also get support from schools. I'm assuming that you're referring to Singapore schools like IHLs like colleges and universities, right? Okay. Does A-Star or all this also provide as well? Any assistance
Uh,
for hardware?
yes, they do, but you have to pay them.
I mean, okay, fair enough, because these are R&D centers that are sort
Yeah,
of set
correct.
up, and I think you also mentioned they own certain equipment that can only manufacture certain stuff that you need, and it's only just one unit, right?
Yeah, exactly,
Only one
exactly.
unit. Okay. So yeah, I think if there's no further questions, maybe what we'll do is we will uh close this conversation. So Sam, do you have any last things you want to share with the audience, especially those who are looking to do hardware startup, right? How should they go about doing it, and how should they maybe prepare mentally? I think 17 years is really very long. I never even stay in a job for 17 years. Not even doing a startup in the first place. Yeah. So why not go ahead and share? Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I have to give my thanks to everyone who is here today as well because you realize that I'm doing a lot of scaring over here because I'm looking at the macro point of view. But now I will follow up with Ko on the follow up because now the thing is end of the day, right? You will realize that um I like one of our forefathers, you need to have that iron in you, right? To actually
Mm,
go through a hardware startup process. Because the thing is, now, akin to software startups, you have to know what is your product, what is your key delivery, what's your selling point, what's your USP. That's one thing. But
mm,
compared to the limitations of software startup, where everything is very much in the virtual world and versus the electricity fees, right? The hardware startups, right, is a much more bigger challenge because you need to look at what is the world at large and what is the resources we have, especially on the material resources. Essentially that is one of the key limitators, and we've comes to now I'm going to touch a very large a very big picture of what we call sustainability now on, especially on the carbon emissions and everything. That is something for everyone to think as we end this conversation, is that how sustainable is this use of resources that we have,
mm,
because this is one of the key factors in the current century, and it is going to be one of the key breakers where if you have a hardware product that is able to be used continuously, what we call a circular economy, this is one of the things that it will benefit in the long run.
mm. Okay. Hey, thanks, Sam, for sharing with us. So for those of you who are here, right, if you do not know, this AMA is actually brought to you by Anthropos Hub and also Startup Village and also Startup Storm Asia as well. So in order to follow our activities and all this, right, I already put the LinkedIn page for Anthropos Hub onto the chat. So if you can, please do follow us, and we do actually have a lot more activities coming up in January and February. So with that being said, again, thank you very much, Sam, for sharing with all of us over here, and also to our audience for attending this AMA. I truly really learned a lot. And yes, KK, I hear you. I'll buy him a meal when he comes back. Okay, so thank you very much everyone for attending. Have a good evening, and thank you, Sam, again. And yeah, please
Thank you, everyone.
all the best to your startup. Yeah,
Thank you.
thank
Bye.
you. Bye.